No bun, hai să-i dăm, nu știu ce de acolo zice. 3, 2, 1. Hello everyone, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are and you still have the courage to watch this thing. I'm again with Paul. All the subscribers might remember him. If you don't, please do watch the playlist from last year. Hi Paul, welcome back.
Glad that you could have me.
Okay, so I was supposed to come to Sweden this year and I need to apologize that I didn't. But, you know, it's a time limit and a shekels limit, but especially a time limit. There's just no way.
You're a busy man.
Yeah, I am. I've been busy helping other conservatives in other places. But nevertheless, I'm glad that you came here. So I get to get an update for how agitation is going in Sweden and what is going on there. And of course, my subscribers will get some update too. So, I don't know, let's start with the beginning. Will Sverigedemokraterna win?
I think that there is a very strong possibility that they will become the biggest party, because there's been a very chronic underestimation of the Sweden Democrats all along. I mean, you know, in 2013 they said, oh, the Sweden Democrats aren't going to get more than 9% of the vote.
They got 14.
Yeah, somewhere thereabouts, 13.9, 14. And I think it's like the 80s in the United States, you know, the Reagan Democrats, registered Democrats who voted for Reagan because he was competent, like the Democrats. And I think we have a lot of Åkesson moderater and Åkesson socialdemokrater, you know, people who wouldn't be caught dead admitting that they're voting for the Sweden Democrats, but they're going to do it anyway.
How is polling being done in Sweden? Because I've noticed a significant difference between the polls made. I forget the name of the pollster, but there is a pollster in Norway that is doing Sentio, yeah, and their polling is a lot more accurate than the pollsters inside Sweden. Why? What do the Swedish pollsters do wrong?
I think there used to be a methodological thing a while back when your identity wasn't really kept secret. Allegedly they've started to make it secret from now on, but I think there's still a great deal of distrust towards the Swedish pollsters. So that's why Sentio tends to reflect it more accurately, because you know, people who vote for the Sweden Democrats feel more comfortable saying so to Norwegian, you know, because it's a comparatively very sane country, rather than to a Swedish pollster.
The Sentio's argument was that they take into account what they called online mood as well.
Yeah.
Does that make a difference?
I think it might make a difference, though again the traditional Swedish pollsters and of course the parties who aren't very overly fond of the Sweden Democrats, which basically is every other party, they're saying that, oh well, it's not reliable because it's online, so a lot of Russian trolls, no, not really Russian trolls, but trolls are spamming the vote and they're voting again and again. But it's kind of interesting, you know, for an allegedly untrustworthy Russian bot influenced poll, Sentio still has the most accurate
and has had historically. I mean, they've been correct last time and 2 times ago and 3. I mean, they've been doing polls in Sweden since like what, 97, 96, something like that. I'm not
sure, but I mean the two elections when the Sweden
even
Democrats,
before Putin was in there.
I mean the 2 elections when the Sweden Democrats made it into parliament, they got the Sweden Democrats absolutely right both times.
So, within the margin of error, but nevertheless.
So I think that's mostly psychological, really, because I mean, you know, if people called me and, you know, if they were from Initio, from Demoscope or from Sentio, I would probably say I'm voting for the Sweden Democrats no matter who called. But for many people, it's like, you know, oh, what will my family say? What will my boss say? Even though the stigma is decreasing, interestingly enough.
It was decreasing last year when I was there. Is there a push, and I don't know if you know anything about this because we didn't discuss it beforehand, but I've seen just yesterday evening when we already knew that we're going to record something, but is there a push by state actors or someone else to paint any sort of opposition as trolls or Russian bots or whatever? Because I've recently seen a website in Romanian, but hosted in Sweden, talking about how Russian trolls are spreading disinformation about the Swedish heaven. And I'm like, okay, maybe there are some Romanian expats who just like Sweden the way it is now and they are writing it. But then I saw a very, very similar type of article written in Spanish. And then I saw another one written in Hungarian. And I'm like, nah, this looks like organized.
Yeah, well, I mean...
could there be some Svenska Institutet, for instance, or I don't know, something like that?
Well, I mean,
there is a Ministry of Propaganda, after all.
Yeah, well, I mean... There is a narrative among the established parties that the Russians or the boogeyman or whatever may try to influence the election in favor of Jimmie Åkesson.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's I have my doubts about that, because the Sweden Democrats, they're both party, and they're really not doing Russia any favors with their policy. I mean, it's like Trump. Trump is Russia's inside man, and then he ups production of oil and gas to lower oil and gas prices. He increases the military budget and sends lethal aid to Ukraine,
and increases in energy competition in Europe, which exactly harms Russia.
It's the same thing with the Sweden Democrats. They want to increase the military budget, and they're not even that opposed to NATO anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like many of the people who were opposed to NATO have joined Alternative for Sverige, or at least some of them have.
Mm-hmm.
So and I think that the reason for that may be that actually pretty much every single Sweden Democrat that I know of who's active in the military is pro-NATO.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of, I would guess it influences the party policy a bit there.
Mm-hmm. What is the effect of Sweden not being a member of NATO? Because it's obviously politics goes a little bit different in Sweden than even its neighbors, and let alone most of the continental Europe. Does it make a difference?
I think it would make a difference primarily because, it's of course a freeloader argument, but as members of NATO you do have the collective defense Article 5, I think,
yes.
Yeah. So, you have a certain guarantee there. I mean, with the EU you have an article in the Lisbon Treaty that says that we should send help or something like that to a beleaguered European Union country, and then nobody knows what that will amount to.
Well, it's basically like any other guarantee in the European Charter of Rights and Free. I mean, let's not forget the same Lisbon Treaty has free speech provisions, and yet free speech is only found in this part of the European Union, not so much in others.
Yeah, that's true. No, but I think that's really the biggest difference. And other than that, I think that if push comes to shove, and if the shit hits the fan, then there would probably be a NATO intervention if, in a hypothetical scenario, Russia would try to take Gotland, because it would leave the Baltic states much too vulnerable for resupply and reinforcement. But I think it's a stronger deterrent. But in Sweden, we have this kind of weird mythology where we say that we've been alliance-free all this time. We've never been in an alliance. We've been strong on our own, and it's not true. There's a book called Den dolda alliansen, The Hidden Alliance, which is essentially just details how from the very beginning of the Cold War Sweden was in tight with the United States, and we were neutral on paper, but we cooperated closely with NATO in many other regards, and that's basically why.
Well, that's not something necessarily to be condemned. I mean, that's exactly what I would have done if I had been Sweden's Prime Minister.
Well, of course. I mean, I'm not condemning it. I'm just saying that it's a bit of a naive worldview from for instance, the peace friends, fredsvännerna, as they say, that we've always been neutral. No, we haven't. And I mean, I can't stand that peace movement, because it's the same peace movement who always complains when Sweden signs an agreement with NATO, just a formal agreement about jurisdiction if a NATO soldier commits a crime in Sweden. But when Russia sends a massive nuclear sub through Swedish waters, like, nobody cares. So there's the extreme left, the peace movement.
And they're always peaceful when it comes to civilization defending itself, but if a competing civilization or the barbarians coming, then that's okay.
Just fine. That's okay. In Sweden we have to be tolerant.
Let's dwell a little bit more on political parties, and then we'll get to news, because you've been much more connected than I am, obviously. You've mentioned earlier Alternativ för Sverige. And before we started videotaping, I also mentioned MED, which are basically sort of libertarians, pro-closed borders people.
They're basically...
Do these two parties have any shot? at getting
I would say no. I mean, even Alexander Bard, who's one of their high-profile names. Should we give him an introduction, maybe, because your audience may know who he is?
Sure. Please do.
He's a songwriter and an artist, and my impression is that he used to be rather leftist beforehand, and to a certain extent he still is, but he's profoundly pro-free speech, and he's had some very choice words for many Swedish feminists, which is why on repeated occasions they've tried to have him fired unsuccessfully.
That is to put it mildly.
So and now he's one of the high-profile names for this new party, Medborgerlig Samling. I guess you could translate it as the Assembly of Citizens, which is a right-wing libertarian in some ways and conservative in other ways. And they also have Katarina Janouch, who is a Swedish author who has also come under fire recently because she went on Czech TV and spoke about our no-go zones.
Yeah, and she also spoke about the Second Amendment and spoke about how she will get weapons training in Czech Republic, because Czechia has a Second Amendment, Sweden doesn't. Neither does Romania. Shame to us. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. But yeah, she got a lot of flack for that, and she's a children's author, and she didn't used to be involved in politics.
No. But I mean, she's rather brave and honest, I think, because there was a time, I think, you made Per Ström, who had to withdraw from the debate. He was what would one categorize him as? I think that we're spending a lot to just categorizing.
Non-feminist would be a fair category, sort of like Warren Farrell, but slightly more sane.
Yeah, he had to withdraw from the public debate because he was threatened and harassed so much, and at the time I think Janouch was one of the people who helped harass him, but she has publicly disavowed her actions, said that she didn't do the right thing and that it was wrong. So now she's essentially a persona non grata as well, because
I think she can withstand the pressure. She's been withstanding it very well so far. So she's in the MED as well.
Yeah, I don't think though that any of those parties has a chance, and even Bard actually says that this is a long-term commitment. We're trying to maybe, if not this election, then the next election cycle maybe. On a purely tactical level, because I mean MED is a party that would be more in line with my views than the Sweden Democrats, but on a more purely tactical level, I think that it may be a mistake to divide the right-wing vote, which is essentially what's happening now. Because I mean, look, as far as I'm concerned, MED is kind of in the right on many issues, where the Sweden Democrats are more in the wrong. But right now, those issues aren't the big issues. The big issues are immigration and integration and so on and so forth. And if you have SD and MED and AFS, and they're not interchangeable, but different brands of conservatives head to different parties, it'll essentially split the vote. And due to the 4% threshold, some of those votes may unfortunately be wasted. Yeah,
and they will eventually help whomever is going to win. Essentially. Now that's okay if Sverigedemokraterna wins, but if that's not the case, it may help a competing coalition, perhaps, heaven forbid, another red-green coalition.
I think that would be the end of it, honestly, because I mean, most of the new arrivals have only really gotten the right to vote in municipal elections by now, but in another 4 years, who knows? Maybe we'll have another 200,000, 300,000 voters ready to vote for the Social Democrats or for the Green Party or for the Left Party. And that's going to tilt the scales rather massively.
Yeah, and perhaps decisively. Now, we've been joking last year when I was in Sweden, when we were at that castle, we were joking that maybe Miljöpartiet, the Green Party, will not get into the parliament. How realistic is that now?
Well, many of the opinion polls actually put them below the threshold.
That's what I saw.
The one guarantee for them to get in would be sympathy voting from the Social Democrats. Tactical voting, actually it's called in English, but it's called sympathy voting in Sweden. So let's say if you have the Conservative Party and it has 25%, you know that it's going to enter the parliament, and you have a tiny Conservative Party that's just 3%. So if 5% from the big Conservative Party vote for a small Conservative Party, then you'll have a larger Conservative base. So that's tactical voting. That's rather frequent when it comes to big coalitions with a big party and several smaller parties. But I think Miljöpartiet may be beyond that at this point, because some polls I think put them even at under 3%.
Yeah, that's what I've seen, and that's why I'm asking how realistic is that. I mean, I would love to be true. I would love it to be true, but
I think that there's I'll be a bit pessimistic and say that there's maybe a 50-50 chance they'll stay in if the Social Democratic voter base massively votes for them to keep them in, but on their own I think not, because Miljöpartiet, we have to remember, had this base in the total freaking lunatic share of the population. And now that they've been in the parliament and government and actually had to adapt to reality, that's what Romson said when she was crying there, because she had to introduce border controls, and we have to adjust our. I think she said something along the lines of we have to adjust our policy according to reality.
I remember that speech. I remember laughing. And then having to explain to my wife why I'm laughing so hysterically.
So most of the lunatic voter base that they relied on has moved to the Center Party, because they've been in opposition and they've done a lot of stupid things in the meantime to woo the lunatic voter base, like the Afghan amnesty law, which they voted for as the only so-called right-wing party in parliament.
Yeah, let's explain that. The Center Partiet, or the Center Party, was supposed to be the libertarian, hippie, sort of let's be peaceful, can't we all get along type of party. But over the last 4 years, they've been moving further and further to the left, and as you said, to the loony sector, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think that they really have a perverse brand of libertarianism where you get all of the rights but none of the responsibilities. That's their immigration policy, essentially. Come to Sweden, and if we just lower entry-level wages enough, everyone would get a job, even illiterate cowherds from God knows where. And
now, in fairness, the so-called entry wages maybe should be lowered.
Well, yes, but I mean, that's what Tina Sanandaji writes about a lot. He says, sure, we could get a few more people employed if we lower the entry-level wages, but even the simple jobs in Sweden are very demanding. The political class often has this elitist rhetoric. They say, oh well, they can work at McDonald's, but at McDonald's you have to operate computers, you have to operate machinery on boiling oil, and so on and so forth. It's not that simple. Just because you're in an air-conditioned office in the Houses of Parliament and you think that everything is simple.
Yeah, that's true. Although again, the problem that I've seen consistently, especially with Center Partiet, is that they don't understand that you can have open borders and no or very low minimum wage, but you cannot have open borders and no minimum wage at the same time with a welfare state. Yeah. You gotta pick one.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what they fail to understand. I mean, they have only really half of Ayn Rand's manifesto. Open borders, but let's keep the welfare state. Yeah. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
That's not how any of this works, indeed.
And their latest brain fart was essentially that they voted because there were about 9,000 newly arrived Afghans, and they were deemed not to have any reason to be in Sweden on the grounds of asylum. And instead of leaving, they just sat around and had a strike. Yeah, and all of the refugees welcomed people, helped them, and the Green Party politicians were there and supported them, of course. And now a law was passed that essentially gives them amnesty, provided that they study at a high school, gymnasieamnesti. The problem is, number one, of course, they don't have to prove their age or their identity, and as far as I know, they don't even have to perform well at the high school. I mean, you can just keep failing your high school, and that's fine.
You can be perpetually in the 9th grade.
Precisely. So they voted for that amnesty bill, which pretty much meant that they were the only so-called right-wing party that voted for the amnesty bill, along with the red-green government. So
I've seen the protest. I've seen footage from the protests exactly in that square that we've been to, where the refugees were performing last June, if you remember. And I've seen the protest, and whoever organized that was not particularly stupid, because the speeches being held at that particular rally were meant in some way to, I guess I could say, to woo some of the more moderate amongst us. So basically not you and me, but they had a few Afghans there who spoke very decent Swedish, and they were like, look, we got to abide by the local laws, we got to seek to integrate, and things like that. Things that the more moderate people amongst us would tend to agree, or at the very least tend to consider. So I don't know, does that have any chance of persuading anyone? Because this sort of humanitarian stuff tends to convince Swedes.
Very few people anymore, I would say, would be taken in by that. But the problem is, of course, the people in charge of the political and the media elite are still very much all for this. So, you have a very loud minority that essentially drives us onward. I mean, I think it was estimated that a majority or even a super majority of Swedes opposed the Amnesty Act. It was in SVT of all places, and they still passed it. Because, I mean, otherwise all the newspapers would say racist, intolerant, and so on and so forth. So they care more about this tiny clique of people than they do about the electorate at large.
Yeah, that's one of the many reasons why they deserve a very gigantic kick in the teeth coming this September. But we've been reading in the foreign media. Now I know the answer, but my subscribers definitely don't. We've been reading in the foreign media that even Le Pen had to close the borders and had to start taking some of the started adopting some of the policies that were deemed far right racist just 4 or 5 years ago. How much of that did actually happen?
Not very much, because I think it's interesting. I don't remember if I read it in The Strange Death of Europe, which I've read recently, or somewhere else, but the reason why the flow started to stop very much in the autumn of 2015 was really mostly because of reasons that aren't really connected to the Swedish border controls. For instance, the fence in Bulgaria and
the one in Hungary.
Precisely. So that's essentially what affected it very, very much. And I guess it's good that they've actually started to adopt a more conservative rhetoric, and even the border controls we have are better than none. But I frankly don't think they are enough, particularly because you have the family reunification thing that's going to hit Sweden like a truck.
Is it up to the 4th generation? Did I read that correctly, or only the first 2 generations? So basically, I can let's say I'm 17 and I'm an Afghan, and I can call not just my parents and my brothers, but also my nephews and things of that nature. That's what I remember reading. I think it was in Dagens Nyheter.
I think it may well be. I'm not entirely sure, but I know that the rules are very generous. So that's why, it's estimated that, back in 2015 when 163,000 people came in, it was estimated that another 400,000 might be coming in as a result of the family.
So it might as well be with maybe not 4 generations, but definitely a lot.
Yeah. So it's that's a problem. Unfortunately, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The people
can that be changed?
It can be changed. I mean, that's even what Palme said. Politik att vilja. Politics is a matter of will. I mean, Sweden essentially froze refugee immigration in 1989, Lucia-beslutet. So you can do it. The question is it very politically popular to do so? And we've arrived at a schism where most people probably agree and say, yes, freeze the immigration to Sweden, but the newspapers are all saying that no, we have to be tolerant. And Dagens Nyheter recently ran a story on how there are no-go zones in Sweden.
Oh yeah, I read that one. Was it about a week ago?
Yeah, it was, and Tino Sonandage demolished it a little while later.
Yeah, in fairness, that was so ridiculous that I don't think we need Tino Sonandage to demolish it. You just have to read the newspaper and then put the newspaper down and just look around. And they're like, seriously, mate?
Yeah, I mean, and they keep trying to do this, I don't know if you brought it up for your viewers, but that interview with Joachim Reust, well, not long ago, the ESO in Sweden, it's basically a very reputed organization of economic studies, published a report. Actually, I think it may be affiliated with the government, so it's very hard to wave away.
Hard to dismiss as fake news, for sure.
And it looked at refugees that had arrived from 1983 to 2015, and it concluded that on average, each refugee costs 74,000 crowns per year.
That's about $8,000.
Yeah, and this researcher, Joachim Reust, was interviewed by SVT, and what happens is that it's one of the most embarrassing interviews ever. You should feature it on your channel at some point, because the interviewer, this typical SVT woman says, "But have you taken into account that many people are of the opinion that immigration is profitable?" And I mean, there's this meme, I think, because at some point she also asks him, like, "Have you considered that your report can be used in the upcoming election?" And he just looks at her like this, very silently, for like half a minute, incredulously.
I wonder if she asked him whether he adjusted his findings for socioeconomic status.
No, not quite as bad. But she did call in an economist, who isn't really an economist, from LO, Arena Idé, who said that actually that's not true at all, because the problem with these immigrants is that they're immigrants, is that they're low income, and low income Swedes are just as much of a burden on society as low-income immigrants.
Yeah, but low-income Swedes don't tend to stay on welfare that long.
Yeah, and she tried to ask him that as well, and said, but isn't it a problem also with, let's say, Swedish taxi drivers, that they don't make enough money to pay enough into the social welfare net? And again, he pulls his face like he's thinking, this stupid woman, why did they send her to interview me?
Do I really have to take them seriously? Can I helicopter?
And then he answers, but it's not a political question whether or not we should have taxi drivers. It is a political question whether or not we're going to have immigration.
Yeah.
So I think that his face has really become a meme in Sweden at this point. Like it's just progression, like that. It actually does like that at some point.
Yeah, it just sounds that the boiling point has been reached at some point. I mean, it just had to. Last year we were discussing that it had to.
And I think he made a blog post, because he has a blog, Joachim Reust, afterwards, with, I think the title of the blog post was something to the effect of, "How many stupid questions do I have to answer?"
So I take it that he got the "so you're saying" treatment.
Pretty much, except I think that Catherine Newman actually was better at pretending to be knowledgeable than the Swedish interviewer.
Fair enough. Yeah. Let's switch a little bit to Sweden's neighbors. I'm sure that you've been keeping up with the news in Denmark too. Over the last 6 months, the Danish government has been taking quite harsh, has been adopting quite harsh policies, such as, and I'm sure many people watching this will not know this, but in Denmark now they have a policy, I think it's actually a law, that the children of the immigrants will have to go, whether they like it or not, to classes to learn about Danish values, to learn about Easter, to learn about Christmas, to learn about Jesus, to learn the Danish language, of course. And it's like, I don't know, 25 hours per week or something like that. It even has a limit, a minimum limit of time that the children of the immigrants have to go in such classes, and it is specifically targeted to, I guess, what you would call utanförskapsområden, the ghettos essentially. And credit to Mr. Rasmussen, the Prime Minister, he actually called them ghettos in the speeches in the Parliament, which was quite astonishing. Is there any chance we can? First of all, what do you feel about these kinds of policies in Denmark?
Well, I mean, as much as you could argue that having children forcibly learn about Jesus and so on and so forth would not be compatible with a secular society. I'm much more in favor of that than the alternative, because in Sweden you have, for instance, there was a scandal in Borlänge, which is actually almost in Norrland. It's not quite in Norrland, but it has this ghetto.
It's Norrlandish.
Yeah, it has a ghetto of its own called Tjärna Ängar, which is called Little Mogadishu by the locals. And the children there on top of ordinary school went to a Quran school. I think they're still going. Yeah. And it was revealed, and I don't know how he kept his job, but a Swedish principal in Borlänge said that I think that this is a problem because A, the children don't have enough time to study the ordinary subjects like the sciences and the languages because they're too busy memorizing verses of the Quran, and B, they actually start hating kafirs. You know, there have been many incidents of them telling non-Muslim teachers, I won't listen to you, you are a kafir. Why should I listen to you? You are not a Muslim. And so on and so forth. And of course we went to the imam who held the madrasa, and he said, oh, I had no idea they were doing this.
No, of course not.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the education situation. I mean, I was presenting. I think it was either in this on this channel on the Periodic Insanity or on the Romanian language podcast. I really don't know it, but it was a case of several kindergartens in Stockholm where they would quite literally sign up to the parents and say, look, we're going to take care she doesn't take off the hijab.
Yeah, actually I think that was both in Stockholm and in Gothenburg and in Malmö.
Stockholm and Gothenburg,
and it was basically a social experiment because they called into kindergartens in these no-go areas or in, utanförskapsområden in general, and they posed as parents of little girls and said, look, while our girl is at the kindergarten, we don't want her to take off her veil. And 70% of the kindergartens just complied with that. So, okay, we'll make sure she doesn't take off her veil. So, I mean, do I think that in an ideal world children should be forced to learn about religion of any kind? No, but I'd much rather have the Danish solution than the madrasas in Sweden.
The madrasa solution. Yeah, I mean, we have a Gadsden flag behind us, so I guess we can definitely say that the Danish policies are authoritarian and therefore kind of haram. Yeah. But where were the anti-authoritarian critics? I mean, yeah, you and I were still here, but most of the people complaining that it's authoritarian were nowhere to be seen when, in an authoritarian way, the far left decided to flood our societies with individuals who not just don't believe the way we do, but they actively hate us. Their active goal is to destroy our societies. And I say our societies because this has been attempted here too in Romania, although admittedly not to the extreme that has been going on in Scandinavia. Because the next thing I want to ask you is about the private propaganda, the way I call it, in the sense that it doesn't come from state actors. For instance, here the Catholic Church, the Jesuit order, is running a public campaign. Basically pro-open borders. They're like, I'm a foreigner until you get to know me. Sunt străin până mă cunoști. These kinds of displays have been popping up in Constanța, in Iași. They didn't pop up here. I wonder why. But they did pop up in Constanța and in Iași and in Timișoara. They haven't tried the inclusion Bucharest for now. And this kind of private propaganda has been going on in Hungary too. That's why Orban is so busy trying to force these NGOs to disclose their funding and limit their activity if their funding is from abroad. Basically saying, look, what is an NGO? It should be an organization that represents a segment of the Hungarian society, not a segment of the Swedish society or the Italian society.
Yeah.
To what extent are these things still going on in up there in the north?
Well, in Sweden, I mean, I think the biggest. On the one hand, they possibly don't need it, but I think that one of the biggest NGOs that actually has contributed to the situation today would be the Swedish Church. And I oftentimes say that it's a good thing that the Swedish Church isn't a corporation, because then it would be sued for misleading marketing, because it is neither Swedish nor a church. But it's essentially just a far left, rather militantly, almost atheistic at this point organization. You know how they want to make Jesus and God gender neutral. There was a discussion a while back that they were going to make the church
covered that on this channel.
handbook gender neutral. And there's a book there are several books on the topic, 68 kyrkan, and there's also a new one by Helena Edlund, the priestess who essentially became unofficially excommunicated from the church for daring to launch a hashtag for persecuted Christians around the world, because apparently that's Nazi.
So let's get this straight. A priest in a church launches a public campaign about defending Christians who are persecuted somewhere else, and is being punished for that.
Yeah, pretty much. Because they said that
that's not a church, mate. I mean, I'm an atheist, but that's not a church.
Yeah, I mean, she's essentially been persecuted since. I mean, she's had a heap of problems with the church. You know how because they feel that she has some sort of second thoughts. No, not second thoughts. I would say that. No, second thoughts. Sorry about that. Ulterior motives for doing it. Oh, you say that you're standing up for persecuted Christians, but I bet that's just because you're a Nazi or something like that.
Well,
so that's
I'm not so versed in Christian theology to that extent, but isn't it part of the Christian way of thinking that even if it is an ulterior motive, if it is a virtuous cause, I'm still going to try to support it? I mean, even if that were true.
I'm not particularly well versed in Christian theology either, but I mean, I think it's just absurd regardless, because
I mean, isn't it that God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes God works through evil
possibly
people?
But I mean,
I guess there's that concept is just missing from the Swedish church.
It is. Well, the church, of course, has other problems as well. Not only is it far-left extremist pro-immigration, but it also hates Israel. I mean, there was a lengthy opinion piece in Dagen, a Christian newspaper, where a priestess, not this one, but another one, called out the archbishops, listing their cooperation with Palestinian organizations, and that they referred to the 70th anniversary of Israel as the catastrophe. They used the Arab word the catastrophe to describe it.
So a church sides with Hamas, which has in its charter the objective of throwing all the Jews into the sea. Oh, Jesus Christ.
The Church of the Holy Leftism.
The Church of the Holy State and Holy Leftism, yeah.
Immaculate Leftism.
Skeptor, whom I will be interviewing in Israel a few months from now, when we'll have our Jordan Israel tour. Give shekels for that, by the way. He was saying at some point that, look, there is a lot of soft bigotry and soft anti-Semitism coming out from Sweden, but on the other hand, you know, as Jews, what the hell can we expect? I mean, we expect people to treat us the way they would treat their own, and they do treat us the way they treat Swedes. So, you know, there's nothing more than we can expect from that.
Yeah.
That kind of wow.
Yeah, I mean, Swedish society at large isn't really as batshit insane as the church and the left.
Yeah, I know
that. But there is a problem in that nobody seems, on the topic of Jews, no one seems willing to admit what is the biggest threat towards them. I'll give an example. It was published recently in Samhällsnytt, an article about it. I think a representative of some Jewish organization in Stockholm published an SVT article, opinion piece, because, you know, now all the party leaders have been, oh, Nazis, oh, let's save the Jews, oh, Nazis. And he said, well, look, thank you for the kind words, but there's a bigger threat towards us than the Nazis than, well, as Tino Sanandashi would say, zombie Hitler and his 50 Nazis. There's a bigger threat to us than the Nazis in Sweden. It's the Islamists. Well, the article is removed a few hours later from SVT, and someone on Twitter asks them why, asks the official SVT account why, and they say, because the author and his family was severely threatened. They received death threats, all of them. So he took it down. I mean, if it would have been Nazis doing the threatening, I think it would have been, you know, on every newspaper, you know, let's stand up for freedom of expression. So all I can say is, since they didn't, since they just quietly removed the article,
Yeah,
evidently it wasn't the Nazis.
It obviously wasn't the Nazis. Yeah, it was either Islamists or other leftists.
Yeah.
Amazing. I presume you don't see the threat of Christian extremism in Sweden anytime soon, in the sense that...
I mean, I know of only one instance of Christian extremism that actually harmed other people, and that was the Knutby murder of 2004, some kind of crazy sect where someone or a couple of people were murdered.
I know the case.
Other than that, that's what people keep referring back to all the time, Recently it was revealed that I think 1 in 3 girls with both parents born outside of Europe in Uppsala isn't allowed to choose whom to marry. She's not allowed to make an active choice. And whenever you present things like this to a leftist, they'll say, but Knutby. Yes, okay, I know about Knutby. That was one incident. And Christianity is a majority religion, so if Islam were the religion of peace, you'd think that it would be proportionate.
I've had a similar discussion just a few days ago with a Romanian expat who's a member of Venstrepartiet, and she, of course, she's a woman. She was telling me that but there are immigrants from Eastern Europe who commit all sorts of crime, and I started looking into the Central Statistics Bureau, and I was able to find about like 3 or 4 petty thefts. None of them from Romania, none of them from the European Union. Actually, it was a Kosovar and a few Macedonians, and there was a case of I guess sex ring, but it was prostitution with adults, not with children.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it over the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm like, well, this is the biggest crime committed by Eastern Europeans. I'm sorry, but it's just not proportional, considering how many Eastern Europeans already live in Sweden.
Yeah.
I mean, if they were to be proportionate in their crime, they would be very close up there with the Islamists, but they're not.
No, but I mean, it's just... that's the most annoying part, really. And I mean, people talk a lot about, it was a big hubbub, if you know about him, Åke Gren, the pastor who in 2005 had a sermon. It wasn't in the Church of Sweden, it was a separate church, but he said that homosexuality is a cancer in society. Okay. But at the same time he said that, you should love the sinner, but you should fight the sin. So basically, it was rather tame. And of course it caused a massive debate in Sweden, just how far should religious freedom and freedom of expression go.
Very far.
Now, the thing is, it's a very tame statement compared to what you hear in mosques. I mean, I know people who have been formerly in Islam. Some of them have actually even been former Islamists, like, Mohammed Omar. And if you read what he writes about it, Åke Gren's statements seem pretty tame. I think you won't find a statement as tame as that in any mosque in Sweden. Because there's kill the Jews and...
fight the infidel everywhere and behead the infidel and these kinds of things.
And this is at the grassroots level again, not grassroots, but I mean from a very young age. Really, you have the children in Borlänge, for instance. I won't listen to you because you're a kafir, and I won't do as you say because you're not a Muslim. That's where it starts, at the madrasas and the Bismillahi kindergartens. It progresses, and ultimately the sad truth is that for many years there hasn't really been a properly proclaimed Swedish culture for them to integrate into, because every national holiday the Swedish newspapers have had kind of a race with one another to say that, there's nothing particular about being Swedish, don't feel proud about it, you damn racists. So why do you want to integrate into a culture that, if it even exists, because according to many newspapers in Sweden it doesn't. And if it does exist, it apparently is very self-loathing, because all the journalists are busy saying that, everything comes from abroad, our meatballs come from here and so on and so forth, so don't think that you are anything. So if on the other hand, and that's what Douglas Murray writes about as well, he says, that you have a very strong cultural identity in Islam. You might say that it's a terrible religion, but there is a very strong identity, and you have a very weak and self-loathing European identity. And that's why there is a great danger that the Islamic identity will prevail, because...
Yeah, at the current rate, for sure. I mean, we've both been young men, and when you're 14, 15, 16, 13 even, you're going to look for something to be proud of or something to belong into. That's why even in normal families we tend to have a group of friends, we tend to form a little bit of a gang with which we maybe just watch, I don't know, R-rated movies or whatever, but we want something to belong into. And if the mainstream culture doesn't allow any sort of avenue for that, to be proud of being European, Swedish, whatever, and then you're gonna have to look somewhere else. And if your parents are already part of a group that is a lot more stronger in its identity, namely Muslims, then probably this also explains why the children of immigrants oftentimes end up being more radicalized than their parents.
For them it's a bit of a counterculture almost. Just like, fortunately, apparently conservatism is becoming the new counterculture for the new generation.
Yeah, the Generation Z announces itself to be more conservative than their grandparents.
Yeah.
Which I hope it is true, because we bloody need some. We bloody need some of that.
Yeah. No, but it's on the one hand, it's a problem that their way of life is subsidized with welfare. On the other hand, there is no strong natural national cohesion to integrate into.
To aspire to be part of.
Yeah, I mean it's if you look at national holiday celebrations in Sweden, they're very, very weak compared to the ones in Romania.
Or the ones in Norway.
Yeah, I mean you do have the newspapers that say, oh, Sweden is nothing in particular, 24/7 for pretty much the entire week of national holiday, and then you have I think you have a musical event at Skansen, and that's mostly it. I mean, if you look at Romania, you put up videos of that as well. You have military parades in every city, pretty much, and flags everywhere, you know. And you don't see that in Sweden. In Umeå a few years ago, they even wanted to ban the military from participating because it might be offensive to the new arrivals or something.
Even if that were true, in the sense that would be offensive for the new arrivals, I'm like, yeah, so what? I mean, this year, my intention is to go participate in the 100th anniversary of Poland being on the map, which is in November, and then on December the 1st, it's Romania's 100th anniversary since the Great Unification. I kind of do expect the military parades and the flags and everything, so in Poland, so in Romania. So what if it offends the newcomers? I mean, yeah, so... I mean, I'm pretty sure that on the national holiday of Pakistan, they have the military parades and the flags and whatever.
Well,
and if I were to be there during Pakistan's national holiday, even if it were to offend me, I wouldn't expect them to give a damn.
Yeah, well, but that's a problem. I mean, Sweden is, especially the Swedish left, I would say, it's a culture of appeasement. Really, you know. It's the educational system, of course, is very leftist, and that's why the preschool teachers just agreed, lock, stock, and barrel, to just force the little girls to wear the veil, because, you know, oh, they want to. Maybe they'll be offended if we say no, we won't do it. So why not? I mean, that's the interesting part. I think that I'm willing to bet that most of the preschool teachers who agreed to force little girls to wear the veil were by no means immigrant. I'm willing to bet they were Swedish, many of them. Just leftists who thought that it was their moral duty to force little girls to wear the veil because otherwise it'd be intolerant.
And that's what it is, isn't it? I mean, Jan Gunnarsson told me in the interview that we made last year in your living room. He told me then, and I thought he's a bit too harsh even by my standards, but the more time goes on, I'm thinking that maybe he had a point. The Swedes are the problem.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Tino Sanandaji is an immigrant. You're the son of immigrants.
Hanif Bali
is an Iranian.
Alice
Teodorescu is Romanian, yes. I mean, if you look at a lot of the prominent voices that are countercultural, dare I say, are either the sons and daughters of immigrants or immigrants themselves. There are very few native Swedes who are willing to fight for Sweden. Why is that?
Well, because, and I think that we may be getting a bit nostalgic here, but I think it refers back to the interview with Joachim Ramstedt. And the title of it really, I think, says it all more or less. We are an obedient people. Protesting is not our thing. And I think that's really it. I mean, how come the Swedes were more than willing to go through 21 years of grueling war in the Great Nordic War? I mean, we're talking like I don't know how 10% or more, 20% of the male population died, and they were willing to go through it and never revolted even once, even though there were many occasions where they could have sued for peace beforehand and stopped the war, but they didn't. And it's really the consensus culture and the Protestant work ethic. This is what we have to do, this is what we're told to do. And it's very sad, because it's the same force that really allowed Sweden to become an economic superpower, well, by regional standards.
By regional standards, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the poor agrarian society, it was in the 1860s, and then by 1910 it was one of the richer countries in Europe. And it was really the Protestant work ethic and the high trust in society and government. And now, unfortunately, the high trust in government means that even as women have to give birth in the car because there aren't places in the maternity ward,
or in the helicopter on their way to Finland.
Yeah, we've had a few cases like that recently. Just now, actually, we have them pretty much every week. But even now, there are a lot of Swedes who will be going home to pay their 70% or more effective tax rate, and they will be saying, well, it's pretty good anyway, isn't it? So it's a very complacent and very, I would say, obedient people, and that's very unfortunate. Because there's nothing wrong about working together towards a common goal, but when something goes wrong, you have to be able to say, well, hold on, this isn't good anymore. We have to stop. And I think that for far too many Swedes, not Swedes in general, because I mean the Sweden Democrats wouldn't exist if all Swedes were obedient.
Obviously, yes.
But for far too many Swedes, just that they're shrugging and they're saying, yeah, whatever, it's still pretty good. So it's just shrugging and moving on and saying the government knows best. It's that attitude, really.
Terrible.
Which is what's so refreshing about Eastern Europe and Romania, of course, because if you ask the average Romanian, it's kind of an inverse, really. You know, many Swedes hate, or at least don't appreciate their country, but appreciate their government. And for Romanians, it's the other way around.
It's exactly the other way around, yeah. And not just Romanians. Ukraine is the same, Hungary is the same, Poland is the same. Well, nowadays Poland is discovering a little bit more appreciation for its government, but then again, the government is rather sane during this period when we're taping this. But nevertheless, I guess 50 years of having a government that is obviously untrustworthy tends to create a legacy in the population that, know, maybe sometimes the government just doesn't know best. I was joking with someone when I was telling them about this thing with helicoptering women to give birth in Finland, which is a true story, and I'm like, imagine that happening in a hospital here in Cluj or in a hospital in Oradea, having to get into the helicopter to go and give birth in Hungary or in Ukraine because there aren't enough spaces available in the state hospitals here. I think that would be a protest in the same day, and by the evening there will be the helicopters of the National Anti-Corruption Directorate coming in and saying, who do we have to pick up? I mean, that thing just doesn't cross the mind of anyone. I mean, there are a lot of leftists, I would say, anyway, people with whom I don't necessarily agree, that go in and protest at the government in Bucharest for a lot more milder things, a lot less serious things. I guess you guys kind of need a bit of protesting culture.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that
would be good, but I'm not sure we have it, because again, by and large,
we didn't used to have it either. You just had to learn it.
Well, I mean, but it's just that by and large, it's comparatively a very obedient people, and that's the main problem. I mean, I oftentimes say, I don't know if it's true, because it's a hypothetical alternate history scenario, but if Romania would have been the reasonably capitalist country during the Cold War and Sweden would have been the communist dictatorship, I'm not sure we would have rid ourselves of the communist dictatorship, because Ceausescu or whoever would have been in his place in Sweden would have just said "Stați liniștiți la locurile voastre," and everyone would have done it.
Well, considering that there was such thing called Yeote, which wanted to annex Sweden to the USSR, I don't think you're particularly wrong. Terrible. All right, let's wrap this up with a bit of foreign politics. President Trump had a meeting with Vladimir Putin very close to Sweden. They met in Helsinki.
Yeah.
Did you get the chance to look a little bit at this? How do you view this?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think that you have to talk. You always have to have a diplomatic channel. And of course, the Western media, and also occasionally, which surprised me, Euromaidan press tends to run, rather apocalyptic and terrified stories, saying, "Oh my God, Trump will agree to give over Crimea to to the Russians."
I've been threatened that this will happen for the last 3 years. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, soon enough there will be another presidential election in the United States, and probably even by that time there will still be the threat that he'll agree with. I mean, the Trump administration even went further than Crimea and said, "Look, you got to get the hell out from Georgia. You got to get the hell out from Transnistria." I mean, they even went further than.
Yeah, I mean, I caused quite a ruckus because I had a little high school reunion a while back, and I caused quite a ruckus by saying that actually, at least on the foreign policy front, I'm pretty much in agreement with everything that Trump has done.
Trump has done, which is essential to mention. Trump has done. I mean, he said some dubious and questionable things, but when it comes to things actually being done, what happened with as you said? I mean, Euromaidan also runs a lot of this. What happened with the sane people who used to be very reasonable, and now suddenly they put a lot more accent on the things Donald Trump says, rather than the things him and his administration are doing?
Yeah,
because sure, there is a difference.
They're never happy. That's moreover the point.
There's no way you can win with these people.
Because when he said, I think that he made a comment at one point or another that I'm not sure if it's just reported or if it's actually on tape that Crimea is kind of Russian because everyone speaks Russian. A lot of people were upset, and because I was apparently pro-Russian, and then later at another meeting, he lambasts Germany for becoming energy dependent on Russia and says that I don't think it's a good thing, and they still criticize him. I'm like, but hold on, he's doing the right thing here. Not just doing, he's saying the right thing here, and you're still criticizing him. What the hell?
I mean, the Nord Stream, from a geopolitical perspective, is an absolute catastrophe. And again, let's not forget Nord Stream 1, which is already operational, was built as a result of endemic and systemic German corruption. I mean, Gerhard Schröder approved it, and then he himself went on to become the chairman or part of the board of directors of the company that was building it. There's no way you can get more corrupt than that, and that was suddenly okay.
Yeah, and I mean that was what happened on a rather smaller scale in Sweden as well. There was a scandal at Karlshamn because the Russians wanted to use that port to build it. The context is, of course, that Karlshamn is one of the most important military ports in Sweden. It's close to the primary naval base of Karlskrona, and the Swedish military command had specifically told Karlshamn, don't lease the port, because that's a civilian port, Karlshamn, so don't lease it. The Russians want to use it for strategic reasons. We don't know what those reasons are, but don't lease it. And then suddenly, they leased it anyway. So
it just seems that too many people have forgotten that when it comes to these kinds of war of words and whatnot, still logistics matter. They matter a lot more than political posturing. Well, other than that, I mean, we've heard a lot of apocalyptic stories about what's going to happen when Trump and Putin meet. Well, they met, and they trolled the press a little bit, which, let's face it, they kind of deserved it. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there's nothing really serious and really concerning from a Swedish or Romanian point of view has happened. I mean, it's just... At the end of the day, let's not forget, Reagan was telling jokes to Gorbachev, meanwhile at the same time draining him of resources in the arms race. I mean, who says that these things can't be done at once?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, again, on the foreign policy front, I have absolutely nothing to object to really anything that Trump has done. Because, I mean, lethal aid for Ukraine and tripling the military budget in Europe. And, even some of the things that he said, showed up to Poland, that speech where the crowds ended up chanting Donald Trump, Donald Trump. If it would have been Hillary, God forbid, she would have been there criticizing the Polish for not having enough women in their military.
Or enough transgenders. Amazing. I've seen that recently some portions of the Swedish media have started to be very concerned about Donald Trump's domestic agenda. I wonder why. I mean, they were talking about, oh, but the economy hasn't grown that much and whatnot. And I'm like, even if that were true, shouldn't you be concerned about Sweden's lack of growth?
Yeah,
or
that's
negative
true.
growth?
Well, I mean, it's been downgraded recently. Doggies Industry wrote about it. Our economy is slated to grow much less than the projected expectations. So.
Even with the growing population.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, they try to hide it by saying, well, our GDP overall is growing, our overall GDP is growing. Yeah, sure, if you have 100 million Arabs coming in with 10 cents each in their pockets, the GDP will increase, sure. Overall GDP will increase, but the GDP per capita will take a dive. So that's the problem, and they don't want to talk about the GDP per capita. They talk about GDP and they try to pretend that there isn't such a thing as a human population within the country.
Yeah, and not just GDP per capita, but GDP per capita adjusted for purchase power.
Yeah.
Because, the average income in Sweden still appears to be high, but when you adjust it for what you can buy with that particular income, you suddenly realize that in many places in Sweden, the people are de facto poorer than they are in Poland or in Romania or in Hungary. Because the rent is just too high thanks to socialist regulations. Utilities are getting higher and higher thanks to the Green Party.
Let's not forget a taxi. I took a taxi here from the I think it's Piazza Mihai Viteazu. It's actually where you and me and Aline met the last time by the McDonald's.
The cinema,
So I mean, it's incomparably cheaper here than in Sweden.
And that's under the conditions that the fuel prices are actually slightly higher now here. But the rest of the labor regulations are just much more.
The gas taxes in Sweden are through the roof as well. That affects it as well. So
yeah, but then again, the labor regulations. Last time we met, and we didn't tape then because we didn't have time. But last time we met, you were telling me that in Sweden you cannot fire an employee even if the employee is an alcoholic and doesn't show up to work and things like that.
Well, I mean, I think that if I remember correctly, it was a few years ago, but it was a labor law case. The employer has a responsibility by Swedish law to rehabilitate employees to a certain extent.
But I'm his employer, not his father.
And I think there was this court case where this guy was drunk at work and crashed the company car or his boss's car, and he still couldn't get fired. So,
what do you have to do in order for the employer to be legally allowed to fire you?
Well, I mean, I guess to kill someone.
I guess to kill someone, yeah. But even then, I mean, you can be arrested, tried, and convicted, but still be legally employed and get some leave money or a sequestration package or something.
I mean, it's so it's and I did speak to the taxi driver on the way over. I mentioned that I was actually from Sweden. My parents had emigrated to Sweden. And I did also mention that my parents are not really so much for economic or social reasons, but more for nostalgic reasons, maybe are considering to return, once they are retired and have, the funds for it. Because I don't think they've spent enough years working and studying here to qualify for a pension.
But with EU laws, you can't qualify. Actually.
Yeah. But the thing is that the taxi driver was like, why would you want to come back here? Sweden is so awesome.
And have you asked him, has he ever been there?
He hasn't. He tried to go there in the 90s, actually the same year as my family left for it. But he didn't seem to understand that it's not really a country where the dogs walk around with
gold or cheese or whatever,
hanging from their tails.
This is something that, and I'll put this to you, and then we can wrap it up. But this is something that I've noticed, and I've visited over 70 countries so far, and a bit over a dozen of them I've presented on this channel. Slovenia is coming up next, I promise. I just didn't have time. Anyway, and this is something that I've noticed every single time I've been traveling, that whenever I meet people who've never left their country, or at best they went to a vacation somewhere on the seaside abroad, but that's pretty much it, didn't get time to explore a country, those are usually the people that believe the most mythologies about other countries. And this is true for Western and Eastern countries. In April I was in Albania, and they believed a lot of mythology even about Romania. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not that. Yeah, sure, we have it slightly better than you do, but we didn't have Enver Hoxha, I mean, Ceausescu was bad, but Hoxha was worse.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why we have it slightly better than you, but it's not really that fantastic. But they also believed a lot of mythology about Sweden, a lot of mythology about the United Kingdom, and every time I heard that, I was like, have you ever been to the United Kingdom or to Sweden? And if yes, how much time have you spent there? With how many people have you spoken? And oftentimes the answer was no. And the people that understood a bit of reality were exactly the people that had spent time there. For example, I spoke with a guard from a museum. He was a guard at the museum of the former Siguimi, their Securitate, their secret police. And he had worked in the United Kingdom for like 4 years. And I'm like, well, why didn't you stay there? Most of Albanians that I met said that the UK is a perfect country. And he burst into laughter and he's like, are you kidding me? I'm living better here than I'm living in the United Kingdom. And no, it's not a perfect. Let me tell you why. And I let him speak for like 15 minutes and I'm like, I know, mate. I'm coming from the same school of thought.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it is a good country to live in, but at the end of the day, so is Romania. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, sure, maybe there is even today a slight discrepancy in incomes between the two countries, maybe even a semi-great, depending on which field of trade you're in.
Yeah, for sure.
But
that's true for almost every country.
But the thing is, and I've been talking also to some other people here in the meantime, and say, Sweden's so nice and so, and I said, mate, I live in like an middle upper class suburb in Stockholm. Recently excremented, ran a list of criminal gangs throughout Stockholm. Täby has 2.
Really?
So it has the Green Gang, which only does drug trafficking and related offences. So there may be some violent crime involved, but it's usually in the process
between them. Yeah.
And then you have the Brown Gang, which are the violent ones, and their leader has been to jail numerous times for killing both rivals and his own girlfriend. He shot her in the head. But
why is he still not in jail?
I think he is now, but I don't think he'll. I think he'll be out eventually. And you have 2 criminal gangs in one of the suburbs of Stockholm, where it's considered to be the one of the best. And I'm not going to lie, it's pretty good actually. It is. Yes. It is nice. It's quiet. You don't have a lot of problems, but it is starting to spread slowly but surely. I mean, that's what's been the case in Sweden. You've managed to concentrate the problems to some very, very small areas. And it's like Saint Denis in France. You mention it to a Parisian, he'll go, they don't want to think about it. And it's the same thing in Stockholm. You mentioned Rinkeby, like, oh yeah. But at this point, it started to spread. I mean, we had our first wave of aggravated, I would say robbery, really. People in Täby Centrum having their belongings robbed from them after dark by unknown assailants. Mm-hmm. And this used to be unheard of in Sweden a while back. Mm. So, I mean, in Täby a while back. So it's starting to spread. I don't think it can be contained. Mm. So hopefully
It's exactly the same conversation I was having with a Swede who is slowly preparing his field to move permanently to Romania. He lives in Cerebro, otherwise known as Shitbo or Skitbo. Same thing he was telling me last year when we met. He was telling me precisely the same thing, that 5 years ago it was a very nice place and now not anymore.
That's a bit worrisome though, because on a very personal level it hits home, because my parents, they were, as the Swedish left would call them, Uncle Toms, because they didn't want to stay in the bad suburbs, so they worked and they moved to this upper middle class suburb in Stockholm. And so I've had a very sheltered upbringing comparatively, and now the reality of it is starting to hit home. Holy shit, we have 2 criminal gangs in the suburb. Holy shit,
very close to our home. Yeah.
And holy shit, there's been another robbery. A person's been threatened and forced to surrender his cell phones and everything in Täby Centrum, where I've been many times, including after dark myself. Even when I was a kid, and I never felt threatened in the slightest. Now suddenly it's, oh my god.
Now, you know what a leftist will say? Will say, look, crime happens everywhere. It's not... if you are to live in a society, it's part and parcel of living in a big city. So what? You've had an armed robbery. It's nowhere near that bad. This is the kind of argument that I routinely encounter. Obviously, I don't believe in it, but this is usually the argument that's presented to me. That look, every area in the world has some sort of crime. But I'm like, look, tax evasion is a crime too, but it's the kind of crime that doesn't really affect anyone. Rather than, smoking weed is a crime, or buying hookers in the case of Sweden. There are many. There's many type of crime.
It's a crime on paper though, because it's very easy to do it and get away with it. But
you told me that the police had a long investigation, listening to the doors of.
They try to do that, yes, but it's absolutely ridiculous. And at best, I mean, I'm actually a bit disappointed because I wrote my master's thesis as a critical legal positivist essay about the Nordic model, and I concluded that it was crap and it needed to go. I was half expecting the auditorium, the seminar room, to be filled with angry feminists because it was public, but I was pleasantly surprised almost and a bit disappointed that yes, there were many girls there, but they all asked relevant questions and they totally agreed in the end.
So why does it still stay there?
Well, because the big wigs, the feminist big wigs, Gudrun Schyman and all of the others, the chairs of the women's leagues and so on and so forth, they are totally in favor of it, even though it's pathetically ineffective.
Can those kinds of lobbies be undermined? For instance, who funds them?
Interestingly enough, I think that to no small extent it's the government, because one of the big organizations is RUKS, Riksorganisationen för kvinnojourer i Sverige. And I think that it's to no small extent government funded, if not entirely government funded. And it was also in a scandal a while back. You must have seen that documentary, Könskriget, the gender war. And the documentary filmmaker there interviewed the at the time she interviewed the at the time chairperson of RUKS, someone deeply involved high up in the hierarchy, Gunilla Ekberg. She was also an advisor to the Swedish government. And she didn't answer any questions, and on her way down, when she thought that the camera was off, Gunilla Ekberg tells Evin Rubar, you won't get any help at a women's shelter if you get raped or beaten. That's what happens to traitors to feminism. And this is a tax-funded organization. It has tax-funded women's shelters.
That was 13 years ago, though. Könskriget was published in 2005. I was expecting something to change a little bit because again, I'm comparing with Norway. Norway, when they made the Hjernevask, that had some consequence, especially the first episode, Likestillingsparadoxet, which essentially proved that most of the social scientists, feminist social scientists, are just full of crap. And that had some consequence. The government, it was a left-wing government, came in and said,
I think that the consequence was mainly at an individual level, because some people had to walk. Not Gunilla Ekberg, because the minister in question said, I have complete confidence in her. Because why not?
Because why not,
And but the problem is that even recently, I think that Dagens Nyheter gave me a pleasant surprise, because one of the columnists there, Lisa Magnusson, wrote a critical article about RUKS saying that...
I need to read that.
Because I think that amongst other things, she said that they're forcing women who seek shelter for being battered to separate themselves from their male children.
Yeah, that has been going on for at least 20 years.
Yeah, so she wrote a very critical review, and of course all the RUKS bats were up in arms, shrieking at her for being a traitor to the feminist cause.
That's another reason why I hope SD wins, because the funding for these people, if it is any government funded,
I think it is. I'm not sure how much, but I believe it is.
Even if it's 10 kuna, that needs to be cut. That needs to be cut. I mean, at the very least, don't spend the taxpayers' money for that lunacy. If you can find external funding, then maybe we can talk a Viktor Orban type of approach. All right. I'm thirsty. You're thirsty too. We're gonna go to drink some beers.
And I would apologize to the viewers for possibly being a bit rambling at times and
Don't worry.
stumbling from one topic to another.
Don't worry about it. That's the way I like it, because it gets to cover a lot more in just a short period of time. Obviously, but as I've been saying to a lot of people, what you see on the channel is just the tip of the iceberg. We're probably going to collude a lot more. Hopefully we won't get prosecuted for a Romanian collusion after the election. But
Yeah,
we're definitely...
the Romanian Putin paid trolls.
Of course, yeah. Well, I'm sure you've been called a Russian bot by now.
Yes, which is very funny, because they usually say, look, I've essentially liked and sometimes shared most of the updates of Euromaidan since the beginning of time. That's very strange behavior from a Russian troll.
Yeah, I'm considering to make a video about #walkaway and make it entirely in Russian. Because I've been called a Russian bot by a lot of American leftists lately, especially since I came back from the United States, and I'm like, well, I'm not Russian, I'm not a bot, but I do speak Russian, so I guess that's good enough. So maybe we'll try to do that. All right, Paul, thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
And let's go have a drink.
Yeah, sure.
And as for y'all, see you all soon.